Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on cybersecurity and tech, though. A space that just seems to be changing constantly. And honestly, keeping up can feel like a second job.
It really can.
So, we've got some really interesting stuff to dive into today. We've got some in-depth analysis of the new PCI security requirements that are coming, and then a couple of news stories that really caught our eye. One is about how China is making these big moves to be more independent when it comes to technology. And the other one dives into how deepfakes are becoming a really big problem in the cryptocurrency world.
It's fascinating stuff, especially since you like to quickly grasp those key takeaways.
Right, exactly. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only understand what's happening, but also why it matters and what you can actually do about it.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting is that even though these stories seem completely separate, they all hint at a pretty big shift that's happening across the tech world.
Okay, so let's break this down. Let's start with those new PCI security requirements that'll be in effect starting March 2025. I know compliance can sound kind of boring, but these requirements are going to affect any company that handles credit card payments, even if they outsource the processing.
Exactly. One of the sources we have actually mentioned something called the SAQAEP form.
SAQAEP.
Yeah, that's the form that smaller businesses need to fill out if they outsource their payment processing. So these new requirements are a pretty clear sign that we're moving towards much stricter security standards, even for those smaller businesses.
So it's not just a set it and forget it situation anymore.
Definitely not. It's a much more hands-on approach now. The new requirements call for a way more proactive approach, actually. The source we have lists some pretty interesting ones, too.
Like what?
Well, there's one about needing real-time protection against web-based attacks. And another one focuses on ensuring that all those scripts that run on payment pages can't be tampered with.
Oh, I see. So companies need to be a lot more hands-on with their security now. It's more than just setting up a firewall and calling it a day.
Exactly. They're going to need to actively monitor their systems, constantly be on the lookout for any suspicious activity, and keep everything updated. Oh, and another requirement that really stood out to me was the one about automated audit log reviews.
Yeah.
So instead of manually checking those logs, businesses will now need to use automated systems to do that.
That sounds like it could get pretty complicated.
Yeah, it definitely could, especially for smaller businesses.
Yep.
Oh, and there's also a requirement for change and tamper detection, specifically on payment pages. So it seems like they're trying to stay one step ahead of those ever-evolving attack methods.
So what does this all mean for someone who may not be directly involved in security? Like if they're listening to this.
Even if you're not a security expert, just understanding these changes can help you ask the right questions of the companies you do business with. Like, are they actually following these new PCI requirements? How are they protecting your data? Because ultimately, this is about protecting your business and your customers' data.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something a little more, well, headline-grabbing: China's push for technological independence. One of our sources talks about how Huawei went ahead and released their Mate 70 phone, and honestly, it feels like a pretty bold move.
It definitely is. Even with all those U.S. sanctions that were designed to kind of, slow them down, Huawei just went ahead and built their own operating system, Harmony OS.
Wow.
Yeah, and they even developed their own cutting-edge chips, the Kirin 9100 and 9020.
So it's like they're saying, we don't need you.
It really seems that way. They're willing to invest heavily to create their own alternatives, even if it takes a long time. And get this, they're pricing this phone very competitively, starting at just $750.
Seriously. So, like, do you think that's sustainable for them? I mean, can they actually go head-to-head with these huge companies like Apple and Google?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it brings up some even bigger questions about what the future of tech looks like. Could this actually lead to a more fragmented world, one where different parts of the world use entirely different technology?
That's a really interesting thought. What does that mean for businesses that rely on U.S. tech?
It's definitely something they need to start thinking about.
Yeah.
I mean, we could potentially see some supply chain issues, maybe even a sort of technological Cold War. The Mate 70 is just one example of how things are changing.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. Okay, let's move on to something that I find fascinating and maybe a little bit creepy: deepfakes. Our source today focuses specifically on the cryptocurrency industry, where deepfakes are already a huge problem.
And it's a sign of things to come for other industries, too. One statistic that really jumped out at me was that in the crypto world, deepfake attacks have actually become more common than traditional cyber attacks.
Seriously? Wow, that's a huge red flag. So why are they so effective, especially in the crypto world?
Well, think about it. Imagine getting a call from someone who sounds exactly like your CEO, asking you to authorize a transfer of cryptocurrency.
Oh, wow.
It plays on our natural instinct to trust what we see and hear.
So it goes beyond just stealing money, it's exploiting that trust.
Exactly. Our source mentions that 57% of crypto companies have already reported being targeted with audio deepfakes.
57%.
Yeah, and 53% have been hit with video deepfake scams.
That's insane. So how much are they losing to these attacks?
Well, the average loss is a whopping $440,000.
Oh, that's not small change.
Nope, not at all. And as this technology becomes even more accessible, we're very likely to see deepfakes used in a wider range of attacks, not just crypto. Imagine a deepfake video of a politician saying something inflammatory. The potential for chaos is huge.
It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. So what can we even do to protect ourselves?
Well, our source talks about some countermeasures that are starting to be used. Things like multi-factor authentication, MFA, biometrics, liveness checks, and even video interviews are being used. Basically anything that makes it harder for someone to fake their identity.
So MFA adds that extra layer of security by requiring you to confirm your identity through a separate device, like your phone, right?
Exactly. And biometrics uses those unique biological traits, like fingerprints, to verify your identity. Liveness checks are there to make sure that you're an actual living person and not a deep fake.
So they might ask you to do certain things on camera.
Right, things like that.
Yeah.
But won't all these extra steps make things more complicated for users?
It seems like it.
Absolutely. There's always that trade-off between security and user experience.
Yeah.
Companies are now trying to find that sweet spot, how to protect themselves without making it too difficult or annoying for their customers.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Keeping your systems safe is super important as businesses rely more and more on digital systems, and that's where turnkey cybersecurity can really help.
Yeah, we're here to help small businesses just like yours make sure they're safe and sound in this crazy world of cybersecurity. And we offer a whole suite of services specifically tailored for you. So that's ensuring CMMC compliance and doing penetration testing. We also run vulnerability scans, and we can help you develop a comprehensive risk assessment.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it doesn't.
We handle incident response, should the unfortunate happen, and we guide you through migrations like GCC. We just want to make sure your transitions are smooth and that you're secure.
It's all about peace of mind, right? You focus on what you do best, running your business, and we'll make sure that your digital world is safe and sound. Okay, for our last segment in this part, let's do a quick roundup of some other security news that we found interesting. These are all pretty short hits, but each one touches on a different part of this whole complex landscape.
It's really fascinating how these seemingly random events all tie into the bigger picture.
I agree. So first up, we've got Elon Musk, who's making it harder to read news articles directly on X, formerly known as Twitter. Apparently, he wants people to upload content directly to the platform so that he has more control over it.
It sounds like a power move. It definitely raises questions about how we all get our news these days and how much influence these platforms have over what we see and read.
Definitely food for thought. Then there's this story about a 13-year-old kid who actually managed to scam $30,000 in crypto.
Wow.
But then he ended up getting doxxed.
Doxed.
Yeah, so that means someone publicly revealed his personal information online, often with bad intentions. And unfortunately, this kid ended up facing some serious real-world consequences because of it.
That story really highlights a few things, the kind of ethical gray areas that exist in the online world, how vulnerable young people are in these spaces, and the very real dangers of cryptocurrency scams.
It's a good reminder that it's not all fun and games out there. Next up, we have Geico getting slapped with a $9.8 million fine for a data breach they had.
Which, for a company as massive as Geico, is basically a slap on the wrist.
It is, right?
It makes you wonder if these fines are really enough to deter big companies from neglecting their cybersecurity. If the penalty is just a tiny fraction of their profits, is it really a deterrent?
It's a good point. Maybe we need harsher consequences to make them take it more seriously.
Maybe. Moving on, we've got CrowdStrike, a cybersecurity company, reporting a 30% jump in their revenue after a major security incident that happened back in July.
Wow, 30%.
Yeah, it's interesting because while they've definitely seen some short-term gains, they're also saying that they have some long-term concerns. Apparently, other companies are taking a lot longer to make decisions about their security now, which suggests that the July incident might have shaken confidence in the whole cybersecurity industry.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword for them. And finally, there's a story about how data brokers are failing to remove people's sensitive information, even though there are rules in place that require them to do so.
Yeah, it just goes to show how important those privacy regulations are, but also how difficult it can be to enforce them.
It's frustrating.
It is. Those potential fines might be the only way to get these companies to actually comply. It's also a good reminder for all of us to be more aware of our data rights and to take steps to protect our own information.
Okay, wow, we covered a lot of ground in this first part.
We did. It's a lot to take in, but I think it's important to see how these seemingly unrelated stories all connect to these bigger trends we're talking about today. They all point to this rapidly changing landscape of technology and just how complex cybersecurity has become.
It really has. Welcome back to our deep dive into cybersecurity and tech. In part one, we talked about those new PCI security requirements, China's ambitions to be more independent in the tech world, and the whole rise of deepfakes. Now let's kind of dig a little deeper into what all of this really means. One thing that really stuck with me about those PCI requirements is how much they really emphasize proactive security. It's not enough to just have those basic defenses in place anymore.
No, not at all. You really have to be on top of things these days. You need to be actively monitoring your systems and always on the lookout for potential threats.
Yeah.
It's a big change from just reacting to problems,
Right.
to trying to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Yeah, it's not just a box-checking exercise anymore. It's about actually protecting your business and your customers' data, especially in a world where the threats are constantly changing.
Exactly. And speaking of changing threats, that story about Huawei's Mate 70 phone really shows how the whole power dynamic in the tech world is shifting. It seems like they're pretty determined to go their own way, even if it means going head-to-head with the big players like Apple and Google.
Yeah, it's a bold move for sure. But is it really possible for them to build a whole ecosystem from scratch? I mean, can they really compete with those giants?
It's a bold move, that's for sure. It really makes you wonder, what's next for the global tech landscape?
Mhm.
Will we end up with a more fragmented world where different regions depend on completely different technologies? Or will we see things kind of merge together with new players like Huawei, finding a way to integrate with what's already there?
And what does that mean for businesses and consumers who rely on U.S. tech? Could we see problems with the supply chain or even a kind of technological Cold War?
All valid questions.
Hmm.
It's definitely something that businesses need to start thinking about, strategically diversifying suppliers, exploring alternative technologies, and having backup plans are essential for managing risk in such an unpredictable environment.
Okay, let's talk more about deepfakes. I know we touched on it in part one, but I think it's worth spending some more time on this. The fact that they're now the most common type of attack in the crypto world is a huge warning sign.
Absolutely. And it's not just about financial losses. Deepfakes can erode trust in institutions, spread misinformation, and even incite violence.
It's funny because deepfakes almost feel like a metaphor for all the challenges we face in the digital age. It's getting harder and harder to know what's real and what's fake. It's like we're constantly questioning our own perceptions.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And the scary part is the technology is only going to get better. As it gets easier and cheaper to create these really realistic deepfakes, we're going to see them used in even more ways for all sorts of bad stuff. We already see them in political campaigns, revenge porn, and even to scam people out of money. And as they get more and more sophisticated, it's going to get even tougher to separate what's real from what's not.
It's almost like we're on the edge of a world where we can't trust anything we see or hear. Are we just doomed?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
There are things we can do. First and foremost, we need to raise awareness about the whole issue. The more people understand deepfakes, how they're made, and what they look like, the better they'll be at spotting them.
I've seen some tips online about how to look for inconsistencies, like in the lighting or shadows, or paying attention to things like unnatural blinking or lip movements. Are those actually helpful?
Those are good starting points. But we also need to develop better technological solutions. There are researchers working on deepfake detection algorithms, and some social media platforms are already starting to implement policies to flag or remove deepfakes.
But earlier we were talking about that tension between security and user experience. Won't those detection methods mean collecting more data and using more intrusive security measures? Won't that lead to more privacy concerns?
It's definitely a valid concern. It's a constant balancing act. We need to find ways to protect ourselves from deepfakes without sacrificing our privacy or making the online world too restrictive.
So it's a mix of technological solutions, awareness, and really honing those critical thinking skills.
Exactly. We can't just passively consume information anymore. We have to be more discerning, question things. If something seems off, investigate. Verify information from multiple sources, and be really careful about sharing personal information online.
So blind trust is not the best strategy in the digital age.
Definitely not.
Okay.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and go back to that security news roundup from part 1. There were a few stories there that I think we could dive a little deeper into.
Yeah, let's do it. Which one stood out to you?
Well, the story about Elon Musk making it tougher to read news articles directly on X is concerning. It seems like he's trying to control what people see and read on the platform.
He's definitely not afraid to use his platforms to push his own agenda.
Right. But it raises bigger questions about the power these platforms have and how they shape public discourse. When one person has that much control over the flow of information, it can be dangerous. It can impact democracy and freedom of speech.
And then there's that story about the 13-year-old crypto scammer who was doxxed. It's a stark reminder that anyone can be a victim of cybercrime, even kids.
It's also a reminder that actions online have real-world consequences. And it highlights the need for better education about online safety and responsible technology use. We have to teach kids how to navigate the digital world safely and ethically.
What about that Geico story? That $9.8 million fine seemed pretty small for a company that size.
It does make you wonder if fines are actually enough to stop companies from neglecting cybersecurity. If the penalty is just a drop in the bucket compared to their profits, is it really a deterrent? Maybe we need harsher penalties to incentivize companies to prioritize security.
What about CrowdStrike's revenue increase after that incident in July? It seems like their business actually got a boost from the whole thing.
It's true they saw some short-term gains, but they've also said they have some long-term concerns. It seems like that incident made a lot of businesses more cautious about their security, which could slow things down for them in the long run.
So it's a double-edged sword for them.
Yeah.
And then there was that story about data brokers failing to remove people's sensitive information. It seems like these companies just aren't taking privacy seriously enough.
That's what's so frustrating. We have these privacy regulations in place, but they don't always work. It highlights the need for better enforcement and stronger penalties. It also reminds us that we need to be proactive about protecting our own data. We can't just rely on companies to do the right thing.
It sounds like we're at a really crucial point. Technology is advancing so quickly, and it feels like the risks are growing exponentially.
We are at a crossroads, that's for sure. Technology has the power to connect us, empower us, and solve some of the world's biggest problems. But it also has the potential to be misused, abused, and exploited. The choices we make now will have a huge impact on the future.
So how do we make sure that technology is used for good? What are the most important things we need to focus on?
We have to prioritize education and awareness. We need to equip people with the knowledge and skills to understand both the risks and benefits of technology, to think critically about the information they come across online, and to protect themselves.
It's about making people responsible digital citizens.
Exactly. And we also need to encourage collaboration between governments, businesses, and individuals. No one can solve these problems alone. We need to work together to develop ethical guidelines, implement effective regulations, and create a more secure and equitable digital world.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do.
There is. But I believe that by working together, we can harness the power of technology and create a better future for all of us.
On that hopeful note, we're going to take a short break. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into cybersecurity and tech. We covered a lot today, from those new PCI security requirements to China's ambitions in the tech world, the rise of deepfakes, and even that roundup of security news from last week.
Yeah, we really did. It's been quite a journey, and I hope it's been insightful for everyone listening.
It has been for me, for sure. But before we wrap things up, I want to bring it back to our listeners. We've talked about some really complex and challenging issues today, but it all boils down to one question. What can you actually do about it?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by these global trends and all the potential risks. But there are things that everyone can do, practical steps you can take to protect yourself in this constantly changing digital world.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. What are some actionable things that our listeners can start doing today in their own lives?
Well, step one is always awareness. Stay informed about the latest threats and trends in cybersecurity. Read articles, listen to podcasts like this one, follow security experts online. The more you know about the risks, the better equipped you'll be to handle them.
But it's not enough to just read about it, right? We need to take action. You've talked about strong passwords and using multi-factor authentication before. Those are still really important, aren't they?
Absolutely. Those are fundamental security habits, kind of like washing your hands.
Yeah.
Might seem basic, but they're incredibly effective at preventing problems. Oh, and keep your software and devices updated. Those security patches aren't just for show, they're actually fixing real vulnerabilities that could be exploited.
Speaking of hygiene, what about our digital hygiene? I'm talking about what we share online, clicking on suspicious links, things like that.
That's a crucial point. Be mindful of what you're putting out there online. Think twice before you click on anything that seems even a little bit fishy, and be extra cautious about those phishing emails. They're getting more sophisticated all the time.
So basically, we need to be more cautious and less trusting in general, especially with all those deepfakes out there.
Right. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Double-check information, get it from several different sources, and don't just blindly trust everything you see or hear online. Which brings us back to those deepfakes. We've talked about how realistic they're becoming, so it's more important than ever to really sharpen those critical thinking skills. We can't just take everything at face value anymore.
Okay, that's great advice for individuals. But what about business owners? What steps should they be taking to beef up their security?
Don't wait until you've had a breach to start taking cybersecurity seriously. Put strong security policies in place, invest in training for your employees, and think about bringing in a cybersecurity expert to help identify any weaknesses and build a really solid security strategy.
It's not just an IT issue either. It's a business issue that needs attention from leadership all the way down.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about protecting your data and systems. It's about protecting your reputation and the trust that your customers have in you. A data breach can really damage a business, both financially and in terms of its reputation.
So in today's digital world, having good cybersecurity isn't optional. It's absolutely essential for any business that wants to survive.
I couldn't agree more. One final thought I'd like to leave our listeners with. Be part of the solution. Support those organizations that are trying to raise awareness about cybersecurity, push for stronger privacy regulations, and encourage ethical innovation in the tech world. We all have a role to play in making the digital world a safer place.
We can't just sit back and expect someone else to fix these problems. We all need to be active participants in shaping the future of technology and making sure it's used for good.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into cybersecurity and tech. I hope you found this conversation insightful, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.